If you ask AI where America was born, the answer will probably be very familiar. Liberty Bell, Independence Hall, Philadelphia, and the Gettysburg Battlefield. All of them are located in Pennsylvania, a state considered the cradle of the United States Republic. But the strange thing is, if you type the keyword Pennsylvania on the internet today, the prominent results are completely different. Cities of sin, drugs, corruption, potholes, high taxes, decaying towns, and unhappy people. How could a place that once wrote the first chapter of America now bear such a contrasting image? Is Pennsylvania really in decline, or are we just seeing a half-cut picture? In this video, we will not be searching for a perfect state, but rather exploring a place that reflects almost all the greatest conflicts of modern America. And perhaps the truth behind it will be very different from what you ever thought. Let's get started. Imagine you are opening a map of Pennsylvania. At first glance, it is just a state located in the northeastern region of the United States. But if you zoom in a little more, you'll realize you're not looking at an administrative map, but rather at 6 different Americas stitched together on the same piece of land. To the east is Philadelphia, where history, finance, and urban life intertwine. To the west is Pittsburgh, a city that once thrived on steel, now being reshaped by technology and healthcare. Heading south is the Amish region, where horse-drawn carriages still leisurely roll along in the 21st century. Heading north is Lake Erie with its beaches, vineyards, and scenery that makes many forget they are still in Pennsylvania. Interspersed among all of this are Appalachia and the Rust Belt, regions that tell a very different story about labor, factories, and towns trying to rewrite their future. This is what makes Pennsylvania special. Some people call this place one of the most livable states thanks to its nature, affordability, and close-knit community. But there are also those who see it as a place of high taxes, outdated infrastructure, towns losing jobs, and a feeling of being left behind. The surprising thing is, both could be true. A person waking up by the shores of Lake Erie can start their day with fresh air and sprawling vineyards. Meanwhile, a few hours' drive away, a resident in an old industrial town sees closed shops and inactive factories. Those two contrasting experiences coexist within one state, and that's why Pennsylvania always confuses outsiders. If you look at the population data, the paradox becomes even clearer. More than 60% of Pennsylvania's area is central with mountains, forests, and small towns, but only about 1/5 of the population lives there. Most residents are concentrated around the 2 poles of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, while in between is a vast expanse where the pace of life is much slower. Some have likened it to this. Pennsylvania doesn't have a center. It has 2 engines and a vast expanse of memory in between. Perhaps that is also the reason why many people say they love Pennsylvania, while many others do not want to return. They are not really talking about the same place. And this is what is worth pondering. When a ranking calls Pennsylvania a sinful state, which part of the picture are they referring to? Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, or the small towns in the Rust Belt? When a tourist praises the picturesque autumn forests, is that the same Pennsylvania that a worker who lost their job in the coal mining region sees? Perhaps the issue has never been about who is right, but rather that each person is only seeing a piece of the puzzle. If you also enjoy these multi-layered perspectives, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, because the deeper we delve into Pennsylvania, the more we will uncover even greater paradoxes. And the next paradox is truly interesting. Why do so many Pennsylvanians constantly complain about where they live, but rarely leave it? If there is one thing that makes Pennsylvania different from many other places in America, it is this paradox. The people here complain about their hometown almost every day, but they very rarely actually leave it. Just read hundreds of posts from people who have lived in Pennsylvania, and you'll see phrases repeated to the point where they seem scripted. Taxes are too high. The winters are terrible. The road is full of potholes. Jobs are not like they used to be. After hearing that, you might think that everyone wants to move away. But the interesting thing is, many people who say those things have lived here for 30, 40, or even their whole lives. What keeps them here? That's the question worth exploring. Perhaps Pennsylvania feels more like an old friend than a travel destination. You can complain about them a lot, but that doesn't mean you want to lose them. A person who once moved to California recounted that he didn't miss the gray, snow-covered days at all, but he did miss the feeling of driving through the vibrant red forests in autumn. Another person who moved to Florida confessed that life there is sunnier and more vibrant, but every time he sees a small road winding through the woods, he remembers Pennsylvania. The surprising thing is that what people miss is not the famous cities, but the very ordinary things. The smell of wood after the rain, the familiar diner, the church bells on weekends, or the neighbors ready to help shovel snow in front of the house. There are values that cannot be measured by income or GDP. And then there's another factor that rankings almost never mention: memory. Pennsylvania is one of the oldest states in the United States. Many families have lived here for generations. Grandfather used to work in the coal mine, father used to work in the steel mill, and today the son works in the hospital, university, or technology company. Even though the economy changes, the bond with the homeland remains. Therefore, when a factory closes, the people don't just lose their jobs. They feel as if a part of their family's memory is disappearing along with it. That's why many towns still exist despite having gone through difficult periods. People don't just live in a house, they live among the stories of many generations. Even more interestingly, the farther people move away from Pennsylvania, the more they begin to see this place in a different light. Some people used to say that, when they were young, they just wanted to go far away because they thought Pennsylvania was too slow, too old, and too sad. But after many years living in big cities, what he misses the most is the feeling of peace when just a few minutes' drive brings him to a forest, a lake, or a small town where people still greet each other on the streets. Sometimes we only realize the value of a place after we have left it. And perhaps that is also the reason Pennsylvania always creates two opposing groups of people: those who want to leave and those who have left and are starting to miss it. This does not mean that Pennsylvania has no problems. Complaints about taxes, long winters, aging infrastructure, or declining jobs are all genuine sentiments of many residents. But amidst those complaints, there still exists a very quiet bond. Perhaps what makes people stay is not because Pennsylvania is perfect, but because it still gives them a sense of belonging to a community. If you also had a place that you always complained about but still couldn't forget, please share in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about America from the perspective of the locals, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to join the channel. But that very attachment leads us to a bigger question. If the people still love Pennsylvania in their own unique way, why does this state frequently appear in rankings with the controversial title, one of the most sinful places in America? Is the problem with the people or with the way we are measuring a society? In the next part, we will dissect the very ranking that sparked that debate. When mentioning the phrase, America's most sinful state, many people might immediately envision a place full of crime, violence, or negative things. But if we stop there, we will miss the most important part of the story. In fact, Pennsylvania is not rare of seven cities in the state, especially Philadelphia, which has appeared at the top of WalletHub's annual ranking of the most sinful cities in America. It is worth noting that WalletHub does not measure people's morality. They compile various social indicators such as crime rates, theft, alcohol abuse, gambling, adult entertainment activities, and some behaviors that may negatively impact the community. In other words, this is a statistical picture, not a judgment against the people of any place. Interestingly, even many Pennsylvania residents do not react with complete denial. On the contrary, quite a few people admit that their state is facing very real issues. In local forums, it is not difficult to come across conversations about opioid drugs, neighborhoods that were once bustling now having fewer shops, or towns struggling to find new directions for development after traditional industries have scaled back. What makes Pennsylvania different is not because these issues only exist in Pennsylvania. Most of America's old industrial states have faced similar challenges. The difference lies in the fact that Pennsylvania is like an open book, where both the bright and dark sides appear in the same frame without being easily hidden. This also explains why on the same day, you can come across two completely opposite headlines about Pennsylvania. One article talks about the influx of tourists coming to see the fall foliage in the Appalachians, while another article analyzes the difficulties faced by a town that once depended on the steel industry. A video segment praises Philadelphia as the cradle of American democracy, while the next segment discusses the pressures that major cities face in controlling crime and upgrading infrastructure. Those two stories do not exclude each other. They coexist. Perhaps that is what makes Pennsylvania both fascinating and perplexing to those who only glance at the headlines online. Another thought-provoking detail is that the term sinful is more symbolic than a scientific conclusion. In WalletHub's study, the criteria were built based on the imagery of the 7 deadly sins in Western culture to create an easily understandable approach for the public. That doesn't mean the residents of this city are worse than the residents of other cities. It only reflects that in large urban areas, where the population is dense and socioeconomic activities are concentrated, many issues tend to become more apparent. Therefore, if we only look at the rankings and conclude that an entire province is at fault, we might be oversimplifying a picture that is inherently very complex. And this is the remarkable turnaround. When reading hundreds of comments from Pennsylvanians themselves, what they mention the most is not the WalletHub ranking. They talk about the long winters, the pothole-filled roads, taxes, jobs, the changing towns, and their pride in their hometown. That shows that the concerns of the people are much more practical than the attention-grabbing headlines. For them, the question is not whether their state is called sinful or not, but how to make their community better in the future. That perspective makes Pennsylvania's story more relatable than sensational. If you also realize that sometimes a ranking cannot tell the whole story of a land, please like and subscribe to support the channel. Ahead lies an even more important layer of secrets. Because if sin is not the core of Pennsylvania, then what truly has caused many towns here to change profoundly over the past few decades? The answer may surprise many people, because what changed Pennsylvania didn't start with crime or rankings. It starts with the quiet disappearance of jobs, factories, and an entire way of life that once sustained millions of families. And that will be the journey we embark on in the next part. If we only look at crime statistics or attention-grabbing rankings, it's easy to conclude that these issues have weakened many towns in Pennsylvania. But when we turn back the clock, the story unfolds in a different order. Many communities do not start to decline because of crime. They start to decline when silence appears. It is the silence of the production lines coming to a halt, of the factory whistles no longer echoing every morning, of the parking lots that were once full of workers now only sparsely occupied by a few cars. What disappeared first was not the people, but the rhythm of life that used to wake the whole town every day. Throughout the 20th century, Pennsylvania was one of the industrial hearts of America. Coal from underground mines, steel from Pittsburgh, railroads, machine shops, and thousands of factories created jobs for many generations. In places like Johnstown, Scranton, Hazleton, or Wilkes-Barre, the factory is not just a workplace. It is the clock of the entire community. The shift change makes the restaurant busy. When wages are paid, the store plays music. Schools, churches, local sports teams all operate to the rhythm of the industry. The noteworthy point is that there are towns built almost solely to serve a single economic sector. When that industry changes, the entire town is forced to change as well. But those changes didn't happen overnight. There was no moment when people woke up and saw their homeland disappear. Instead, it is a very slow process. A factory closes down. A few families are moving away. A store has put up a for sale sign. The school has fewer students. The high school football team no longer has as many spectators as before. The young graduates then choose to go to Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, or leave the state altogether to seek new opportunities. A town doesn't lose its people because of a major event. It loses people one by one. It's the kind of change that's hard to notice if you live there every day, but very clear if you come back after a year or 20. Therefore, many longtime residents often recount their hometown with two parallel memories. They remember the once bustling streets, but also see the rows of closed shops. They remember when the school stadiums were packed every Friday night, but they also see the neighborhoods becoming quieter. What is noteworthy is that many people do not tell that story with anger. They tell it in a calm voice, tinged with a bit of regret, as if talking about an old friend who has changed over time. Perhaps that is why Pennsylvania always evokes a very special sense of nostalgia. It not only preserves the history of America, but also keeps the memories of the very communities that contributed to building the country's economy. At this point, we can also better understand a paradox. When jobs decrease, young people leave, and local resources shrink. Many other social challenges may become more apparent. That doesn't mean every town is the same, nor does it mean every difficulty stems from a single cause. But looking at the sequence of events, it can be seen that in many places, social difficulties emerged after a prolonged economic transition rather than being the starting point. This is a very important distinction if we want to understand Pennsylvania fairly, rather than just looking through the sensational headlines. If you find this story similar to your hometown or a town you once knew, please share your thoughts in the comments section. And if you enjoy perspectives that delve into the causes rather than just stopping at the phenomena, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes. Because the interesting thing is, after all those changes, Pennsylvania still retains a very hard-to-explain charm. What makes many people still decide to stay, build families, and call this place home? The answer does not lie in the old factories or the statistics, but in the very ordinary values, things that cannot be measured by any economic indicators. That will also be the final layer of the story we are about to explore. After all the stories about factory closures, controversial rankings, and changing towns, one question remains unanswered. Why does Pennsylvania still retain its residents? If we only look at the economic numbers, the answer seems unconvincing. But life has never been solely determined by money. There are things that do not appear in GDP, are not included in growth reports or employment charts, but are strong enough to bind a person to a land for a lifetime. Pennsylvania has many such things. Imagine a fall morning. The small road winds through the maple forests, with red and yellow leaves covering the ground like a giant carpet. In the distance, a calm lake reflects the clear blue sky, while on the horizon, the Appalachian Mountains stretch endlessly until they fade from sight. This is not a scene set up for tourism promotion. That is a scene very familiar to millions of Pennsylvania residents each year. Many people who have moved to other states confess that what they miss the most is not a city or a job, but the autumn of Pennsylvania. Perhaps that's why whenever they mention their hometown, they don't talk about the skyscrapers, they talk about the color of the leaves. But nature is only part of the story. The next point of interest lies with the people. In many rural areas of Pennsylvania, it is still very common for neighbors to bring over snowplows to help each other after a storm. When someone is repairing their roof, neighbors can drop by to help without needing an invitation. In small towns, coffee shops, high school football fields, or weekend churches are not just places, but where the community meets and stays connected with each other. Someone once said something very nice. You can live in Pennsylvania your whole life and still run into acquaintances every time you go to the supermarket. It may sound simple, but in an increasingly busy and urbanized society, the feeling of belonging to a community has become something incredibly valuable. Pennsylvania is also a place where very different cultures coexist. On the same road, you can encounter modern streetcars running into downtown Philadelphia, and just a few hours later, see an Amish horse-drawn carriage slowly rolling along the country road. On one side are research hospitals, universities, and high technology. On one side are the traditional farms that have existed for many generations. Those two ways of life do not compete with each other. They coexist like two different chapters in a book. And perhaps it is this diversity that makes Pennsylvania never just one color. And then there are the very small things that only locals understand. The endless debate between Wawa and Sheetz is not simply about choosing a convenience store, it's almost a part of regional identity. A bottle of Ewingling beer at a weekend gathering, a hot cheesesteak in Philadelphia, or the deafening cheers when the Steelers or Eagles play. Those things don't make a state richer on paper, but they do make life there feel more intimate. No one decides to stay in Pennsylvania just because of a gas station or a sports team, but many people stay because of the memories associated with them. That's a very big difference. The most interesting thing is that the more you read the residents' shares, the more you see a charming paradox. They might complain about potholes, about winter, about taxes, even joking that Pennsylvania has 4 seasons, almost winter, winter, still winter, and construction. But right after that, they start talking about their first camping trip with their parents, the stream where they used to fish, or the road lined with maple trees that they want to return to every year. No one stays in Pennsylvania for the potholes. They stay because of the people who have turned a land into a home. Perhaps that is something that every statistic table finds hard to measure. If you also believe that the value of a place is not just in the income or the numbers on the reports, please like and subscribe to continue supporting the channel. And I would also like to know, if you had to choose one thing that always makes you remember your hometown, would it be the scenery, the people, or a very small memory that only you understand? Because after all those beautiful things, there is still one final question. If Pennsylvania has nature, history, community, and an indescribable charm, why does this place still frequently spark intense debates? Perhaps the answer no longer lies in Pennsylvania, but in America itself. And that will be both the conclusion and the greatest message of today's journey. Perhaps after more than 20 minutes, we can return to the question at the beginning of the video. Is Pennsylvania really the most sinful state in America? My answer is no, and perhaps that was never the right question. What makes Pennsylvania special is not that it has more problems than anywhere else, but because it cannot hide its own contradictions. On the same map, you can see the Liberty Bell, a symbol of American freedom, and just a few hours' drive later, a town still struggling to revive after years of economic transition, you might encounter picturesque autumn forests, and then pass through neighborhoods facing the familiar challenges of many modern cities. In Pennsylvania, light and darkness do not stand at opposite ends of the story. They stand side by side, and perhaps that is the most thought-provoking thing. We often like to divide everything into two very clear groups: worth living or not worth living, success or failure, good or bad. But Pennsylvania seems to reject all those labels. The more you explore, the more you realize that this state is like a miniature version of America. There is history and innovation. There are close-knit communities and places seeking new directions. There is pride, but there are also very real concerns. Therefore, if you only look at a ranking, you will miss the bigger picture. What makes me think the most after reading hundreds of resident shares is not the complaints, but rather the fact that despite complaining about taxes, winter, or roads, many people still call Pennsylvania home. That says a land is not defined solely by economic indicators or attention-grabbing headlines. It is also defined by memory, community, and a sense of belonging. Perhaps that's why Pennsylvania doesn't leave people silent because it's too bad, but because it forces us to accept that a place can be both beautiful and challenging, both proud and still in need of improvement. That's not just the story of Pennsylvania, but also the story of many other places across America today. And this is perhaps the final twist of the video. What is worth pondering is not where Pennsylvania stands in a ranking. What is worth pondering is how many other states are also undergoing similar changes: job shifts, aging infrastructure, community transformations, and the search for a new identity in the 21st century. If Pennsylvania is like a mirror, then what we see in it may not be just the image of this state. What do you think? If given the opportunity, would you be willing to live in Pennsylvania? Or in your opinion, which state best reflects the contradictions of modern America? Please share your opinion in the comments. I would love to read your perspective. If you find the video offers you a new perspective, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to join the channel on its journeys exploring America from a real-life perspective. Thank you for watching until the end. This video is built from publicly available data, research, reports, and many shares from local residents to provide an overview of life in Pennsylvania. The content does not aim to generalize all people or communities in the state, as real experiences can vary by region and individual. The goal of the video is to encourage dialogue and understanding, not to label or judge a locality from a single perspective. Thank you for watching until the end. See you in the next videos.